In the late 80s, Jack Tramiel stepped down as CEO of Atari, naming his son Sam as his successor. Atari had seen success in Europe, with the majority of its total sales coming from computers sold in that region. But Sam wanted to expand, bringing Atari back as the glorious gaming juggernaut it once was, a move he felt would help them expand back into the American market in a meaningful way. That plan never really worked out, but how it ended seems up for debate. At the end of '95, Sam had a heart attack, causing him to step down from his post, with Jack returning as CEO. Atari would at that point abandon the Jaguar and merge with JTS, leaving video games altogether. The merger seemed like a match made in heaven. Atari was flush with cash due to winning a lawsuit against Sega, and Sam had plans for that money, which was to fund their next video game system, the Jaguar II. However, Sam was gone, and with his absence, so was any consideration of a new video game system. JTS was a newly established bottom-tier hardware manufacturer that had products on hand but no operating funds. There's been a lot of speculation about Atari abandoning the home console market, with many claiming it only happened due to Jack returning as CEO. The home video game console was Sam's passion project after all, so had he not had the heart attack, there was little to stop Atari from pressing forward, as they had plenty of cash on hand. I spoke with Leonard Tramiel about this a while back, and he confirmed JTS was never a consideration until Sam's health became an issue. However, that doesn't mean the Jag 2 was a foregone conclusion, as while Atari was flush with cash in reserve, they didn't have an active cash flow, leaving some internal doubt that the Jag 2 was the right step forward. So ultimately, the decision to abandon the video game market was Jack's alone. Before the newly joined JTS and Atari declared bankruptcy in '99, for reasons directly related to low-quality hardware, the company sold the Atari brand and intellectual property for $5 million to Hasbro, officially ending the Tramiel's association with it. With that, let's get into the games. The rules for inclusion are simple. There has to be some proof that the game was in development, be it an article in a magazine, known copy of a prototype, a retail order sheet, an interview with the developer, etc. With that, let's get started. This is Retro Impressions Unreleased Atari Jaguar. Joust 2000, also called Dactyl Joust, is one of the more notable unreleased Jaguar games. At the end of '94, Williams and Atari announced a partnership to reimagine three arcade classics. Joust, Defender, and Robotron were the games chosen. Atari would get exclusive home console rights, while Williams would retain rights for PC release. High Voltage Software was tasked with creating the 3D version of the 1982 arcade classic, Joust. Early on, they had developed a demo of the original arcade game that ran on Atari's hardware, so it seemed like a good fit. However, High Voltage Software was saddled with a number of other projects from Atari, meaning that while Atari could announce the game, it really wasn't intended to enter development until much later than Atari let on. Development didn't fully shift to Dactyl Joust until High Voltage finished their port of NBA Jam. Things appeared to be going smooth, but Joust 2000 met the fate so many other Jag games experienced at the end of '95. Atari pulled all funding for games that weren't in the final stages of completion, and for this game, it was just getting off the ground. Dantes Inferno was a satirical take on the popular 14th century poem. You play as a stereotypical tourist in shorts and a Hawaiian shirt who accidentally wanders into hell while on vacation. It was designed as an action platformer in the same vein as Rayman. The game made it into the tech demo stage before being cancelled due to hardware limitations, making it clear that the project wasn't possible. This demo was later released by collectors in extremely limited form via DVD. At this point, it appears that the source code has been lost. Deathwatch was a much-needed run-and-gun platformer developed exclusively for the Jag with a planned release of December 1995. The game previewed at E3 and was also referred to as Deathmatch, The Bug, and Switch Death before settling on the Deathwatch name. It was highly praised by internal sources, but the shifting market demand for 3D titles in place of 2D was the ultimate nail in this game's coffin. Rumors about late builds of this game being in the wild have persisted, but they have yet to surface. The game's developer has stated that the workstations used to develop this game have long since gone missing, putting considerable doubt behind the source code ever surfacing. Demolition Man was to be the second and final title to be published for the Jag by Virgin Interactive. It started life as a 3DO exclusive with no connection to its 16-bit counterparts. The game was fairly well reviewed, and a port was ordered by Atari for a mid-1995 delivery. Development was slow, so coming into late 1995, Atari was looking to avoid any contract they could to recoup funds for their next venture, and Virgin gave them plenty of reasons by not meeting their contracted milestones. Footage of the game exists, as does a demo which remains locked away in a private collection. According to sources familiar with the project, not much work was accomplished on this one, leaving it a 3DO exclusive to this day. Info on Discworld came rather unexpectedly, as no connection between it or the Jag has ever been made. However, with the release of the series, we've picked up additional info here and there, and Discworld is part of that list. Dave Swan, who worked on multiple versions of Discworld, confirmed that Atari did try procuring the rights. As Dave states, the Jaguar version never got past a phone call. We would never have managed to sell enough to make it worth our while. At the time, Atari were a joke. The management were all famous idiots, and nobody had time for them. So is it an unreleased game? No. But the story is still interesting, as it represents a climate and perception of Atari during this period of time. Almost nothing is known about Dracula The Undead, beyond the fact that it was in development by Handmade Software. The game is said to be a greatly enhanced port of the Lynx game released 2 years earlier. It was mentioned numerous times in many magazines, yet no real details were ever released, including a reason why it was cancelled or if it had ever left the planning stage of development. Dragon's Lair 2 Time Warp was planned for a number of systems and even appeared to be coming along quite nicely, as a non-playable demo appeared on the 3DO and Jaguar versions of Braindead 13. The game would ultimately become a CDI exclusive for nearly 2 decades until additional ports were finally released. At this time, nothing is known about the whereabouts or details regarding the Jaguar version. Back when I covered Assault Covert Ops in part 2 of this series, I spoke a bit about the game developer Midnight Entertainment. The final game they had in development is Dungeon Depths. The game placed you in charge of protecting the dungeon from pesky heroes. Much like the 2007 release on PSP, what did I do to deserve this, my lord? According to its developer, work was complete on the game's engine, but not much else is known. Late in the system's life, Shiny licensed Earthworm Jim 1 and 2 to Atari. Soft Gold was hired to port the game, but the Jag was so far removed from any other version, it required a new game built from the ground up. The framework was complete with the player able to load a level and control Jim on screen. It was a very early build late in the system's life, so when Atari pulled the plug, Earthworm Jim 1 and 2 were part of the massive sacrifice. If the Jag would have maintained long enough for Atari to release these 2 games, Soft Gold already had plans for their next Jag release, which would have been a Turrican port. Evidence, the last report, is proof positive that games continue to come to the surface long after covering topics that appear to be exhausted. It's long been known that this game was originally developed for the Jag and was said to be fairly far along before being cancelled and moved to the PC. What most people didn't realize is it was also in development for the CDI as well. Nothing is known about the fate of either version, but as I said, it was moved to the PC, releasing in '96, and the PlayStation in '98. To this day, it's never been available in North America. The game has been described as a genre-bending combination of shooter, beat-em-up, with point-and-click adventure elements. It received mixed reviews upon release. The Humans was developed for and released on nearly every major system during 1992. The PC, Amiga, NES, SNES, and Genesis, to name a few. In '93, Atari picked up distribution rights for the system, porting it to the Lynx under the name Dino Olympics. In '94, they ported it to the Jag under a new name, Evolution Dino Dudes. The name situation is a rather odd one, as these are essentially the same game. It's been speculated that Atari felt the original name wasn't marketable, but it still doesn't explain the name change between in-house systems. Anyways, the sequel, called The Humans Insult to Injury, was released shortly after the original and was also planned for the Jag with a '95 scheduled release. Nothing is known about this Jag port beyond this. That's it for this episode, and as always, thank you for watching Retro Impressions.